Hello and welcome back to Don't Depend on Daddy, the podcast. My name is Michaela. I am your host, and we are back this week with our May book club recap. In May, for the book club, we read Deep Work. So today I'm going to be sharing my top 5 lessons from this book. Before we get into it though, we are going to do our usual housekeeping. So if you are new here and you are enjoying this podcast, or you've been listening to this podcast for a couple of weeks, or you are a longtime listener, doesn't really matter, please go leave me a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere where you are listening to this. The reviews really, really help, and I can see all of you guys who have been leaving me reviews. It's helping push the podcast out to more people. I have been working really hard to make this podcast significantly better, and hopefully you can tell and are noticing if you've been listening to some of the prior episodes. I think my new episodes are like much better, a little more planned, higher quality, all the things. So if you are noticing that, if you are enjoying this, please go leave me a review. It would mean the world to me. Second, if you are in the market for a new budgeting tool, you can check out the Personal Finance Dashboard for $10 off using the code podcast1. Something that I don't talk about often is all of my other products and courses and stuff. So I have a whole suite of courses and templates. The Personal Finance Dashboard is my most popular, only very small, or like a very small amount ahead of the Own Your Career template, which is like a career task management system template that you can use if you are looking to just get a little bit more organized at work, advocate for yourself, set yourself up for a promotion, all the things. But since we are getting into the halfway mark of the year, it also is a really great time to reevaluate and reset your finances, or restart and create a financial plan if you don't already have one. So if that is you, you should check out the 4-week financial plan as well. All of these are always linked in the show notes, but I don't talk about them often. So if you are a longtime listener, or are just trying to get your finances in order ahead of the summer or for the summer, this is, I think, a really great suggestion, is to go look at some of those courses as well. And my last little thing is, we are officially less than 2 weeks away from the publication of my brand new book, Own Your Money. So if you have not pre-ordered Own Your Money, maybe because you were planning to buy it on the publication date, or it wasn't coming out for a couple of weeks or months or whatever, here's your sign. We're there. The finish line is in sight. I can see it over the horizon. We are at the publication date very soon. Please, for the love of God, go pre-order this book if you haven't already. If you are waiting for whatever reason, or maybe you think you don't need it, you need it. It's really helpful. There's so much helpful information in here for just getting financially organized, learning some lessons that I learned the hard way. So if you are a recent grad, or you graduated college in the last couple of years and you haven't really taken the time to suss out your finances, this is for you. But also, all of the lessons in here, I almost hesitate to say that, because all of the lessons in here are applicable to no matter what stage you are in on your financial journey, whether you are in your early 20s, later 20s, early 30s, later 30s, if you have kids, if you're later in your life and you are trying to save for retirement, or you're thinking about retirement and you haven't really done that yet, you will find lots of helpful lessons in this book. I promise you're going to love it. Plus, I share a lot of personal anecdotes and share my personal story in ways that I haven't shared it before online. So I definitely recommend getting your hands on a copy of this book. So go pre-order it if you haven't already. All of the information is linked in the show notes. When you pre-order the book, you can get a free budget template, and you will also be entered to win one of 3 actually budgeting consults with me. So we're raffling off 3 30-minute consults with me for people who pre-order the book only. So for reference, I usually do or I have one-on-one consults open for people who have purchased the Personal Finance Dashboard. I take a couple of them every month, and they're $250 an hour. So if you are $250 for every 45 minutes, because I don't do the full hour. And yeah, it's basically a $250 value for just the price of the book, or the chance to win that. So go pre-order it. And yeah, that's my spiel. If you support me, if you want to support small business, if you have learned anything from me, it would quite literally mean the world to me if you could pre-order this book. So we are 5 minutes into the show. I'm not going to bore you with any more housekeeping. And let's just get into it, I guess. So I have a little script up here where I'm going to go through all of my lessons so that I don't forget anything. But essentially, May was the month where we read Deep Work. And this is a book that I've been wanting to read. It's Deep Work by Cal Newport, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And I've been wanting to read this book for a while just because I've been struggling so much lately with focus and getting things done and feeling productive. I think partially because I've just put so much pressure on myself to be super productive and to be super focused. I've been going with or dealing with a lot, just like moving and, learning about myself living alone, feeling pretty burnt out, feeling tired, unmotivated, and just kind of hitting that lull. The weather in LA has been really bad. I think a lot of us out here are feeling like a seasonal depression, which sounds silly to complain about, but it has been cloudy and rainy every single day this year in Southern California. It's insane. And so it's just been like, I don't know, a weird couple of months. I feel like hopefully, God willing, the last half of the year is going to be way more fun and exciting and better than the first half of the year. But I almost feel bad complaining. All that being said, a little bit of a tangent there. I was drawn to reading the book Deep Work because, like I said, I've been struggling with focus. And I felt like this book would probably have good strategies for me to implement to, work on developing my focus and, break my social media addiction and all the things. So I feel like it did that. I definitely would recommend reading this book if you have not read it. But overall, I felt like this book was not only really well written, but also shared a lot of practical strategies to implement that will help you and me take control of the time that we do have, right? And I've been spending a lot of time on my phone, especially at night. I feel like I'm addicted to my phone at night. And I wanted to read something that would inspire me to make some changes and educate me on why I was operating this way and also how to fix it. And I heard really great reviews about Deep Work. Before we get into the 5 biggest takeaways and lessons that I learned from this book, I want to go through 2 very important definitions, and it is the difference between deep work and shallow work. So deep work, which is the name of the book, professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. And if the sound just got a little weird, I am sorry. They are doing street cleaning on my street, and I am not going back to re-record this whole thing. The second definition is shallow work, which is non-cognitively demanding logistical style tasks, often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. So really the big difference between deep work and shallow work is deep work is like that really focused time where you are working on a project, you are distraction free, and you are zoned in. It's almost like just getting in the zone, which isn't necessarily something that I struggle doing when I'm there. It's getting into it. And the reason it's so hard to get into it is because there are so many distractions all over the place. Shallow work is all of the administrative tasks. So all of the little things you're doing all day, like answering your emails, responding to messages, or, setting up meetings, coordinating stuff. It's all that essentially just sucks up time without actually really moving the needle forward on anything. So now that we know the difference between deep work and shallow work, that was kind of the main premise of the first chapter of the book, was just talking about the difference of those two. I think they're both pretty clear cut, but now that we know the difference, I'm going to get into the 5 lessons. So the first lesson was that deep work is valuable, rare, and meaningful. And I know that we all probably sort of know that, but I'm going to go through each one. Deep work is a skill that can add a lot of value to your life. And Cal Newport, who is the author, explores this in the first 3 chapters of the book. So the first 3 chapters of the book are deep work is valuable, deep work is rare, deep work is meaningful. So maybe this lesson isn't super groundbreaking, but what I really want to do is pull, or I guess the way this is structured is I've pulled my top lessons from each main section of the book. So part 1 is this: deep work is valuable, rare, and meaningful. So the part that says deep work is valuable highlights how the labor market is changing, and those who have complex skills that produce high value work will be the most successful. And I've been saying this, that if you are somebody who is in a job, you're feeling kind of stuck, you don't really know what to do, you need to focus on developing your skill set. This premise, I guess, segued into a point that Newport made about how the internet is now allowing people who have specific skills to reach a wider audience, monetize those skills, and ultimately earn huge rewards. It's becoming cheaper for companies to outsource and hire these people externally. Does this sound familiar? Because I literally have been talking about this. And if you're curious on how to do that, develop your skills, work online, monetize those skills, earn a lot of money, you should go listen to my other podcast episode called Starting and Scaling a Six-Figure Business featuring Erin Mortensen, because we talk about that in detail for over an hour. Deep work is rare is about working on sustained concentration. Essentially, concentration and focused work is not very common anymore because we're surrounded by so many distractions, and our brains have become addicted to the distraction, which is essentially why I wanted to read this book to begin with, because I am addicted to the distraction. Beyond that, in order to look busy at work, a lot of knowledge workers, which he refers to, a knowledge worker is essentially somebody who just works like a corporate job or is employed by somebody else. But beyond that, in order to look busy at work, knowledge workers tend to fall into what's called the principle of least resistance, which is gravitating towards behaviors that are easiest in the moment. And this could be like continuously answering emails or allowing email to dictate your day, falling into the trap of shallow work just to look and seem busy because it's easiest. So if you are somebody who, you log into work in the morning and you're looking at your email, and your email dictates what you're doing all day, and maybe you have downtime. So instead of using that downtime to develop a skill or to seek out more challenging work or more responsibility to develop your skill set, you are instead just like going to check your email, answering messages, doing like almost mindless activities just because it's, one, easier, but two, because it gives and creates the illusion that you are busy. And then finally, moving into deep work is meaningful. In this part of the book, Newport highlights that doing work that is both engaging and challenging puts us into a state of mind called flow. In my mind, this is like getting into the zone. You may have heard the term flow state on social media. I feel like it's been a bit of a buzzword lately. But essentially what he says, and I fully and completely agree with this, people tend to feel the most fulfilled when they are engaged in some type of activity that stimulates the brain rather than simple leisure, which is why if you are somebody who maybe you spend like a full day doing nothing, or like you don't do a lot of stuff after work because you're tired, and you think that resting, which resting is important, I don't want to diminish that, but you think that like spending all day on the couch is going to make you feel better, and then you get up after a while and you're like, wow, I feel like shit. It's because stimulated leisure time can actually make you more depressed. And so in order to find happiness and fulfillment and meaning in your life, you really need to be doing things that challenge and stimulate your brain. So if you're not getting that in your 9-to-5 job, you need to get it somewhere else. You need to create that in your life. And after reading this section, I look back at my earlier formative years of my 20s, and I'm like, during that time, I felt so unfulfilled with my life. And it's because I hated my job. I was learning a lot, but I wasn't happy with what I was doing. It wasn't stimulating me in the way that I wanted it to. And so I would use the time outside of work to find things that I thought could fulfill me. So I ran a marathon, I took the CFA exam. I was looking for that mental stimulation because I was bored. And I think that really just proves the point that it's so incredibly important to be engaged, like he says, in an activity that stimulates the brain. Because if you're feeling understimulated, you will get bored and you will get depressed. And I found that to be a very interesting point. After reading through this particular chapter, the Deep Work is Meaningful chapter, I decided to take up a new hobby to focus on stimulating my brain during my downtime. So ever since living alone, I feel like I'm done working, at a pretty reasonable hour. And then I just kind of go on my walk and I come home and I'm just chilling, because a lot of times my friends we're not doing things throughout the week, where my social time is mostly concentrated during the weekends. And I'd love to change that. I'm working on actively changing that. But for now, it kind of just is what it is. And before I lived alone, like my roommate would come home, we would cook dinner together sometimes, we would just chat. Like there was somebody around for me to talk to. So I don't feel like I felt as understimulated as I do now, because I just spend so much time by myself between living alone, working alone, doing all the things by myself, essentially. Like I'm literally alone most of the time. And so I'm like, okay, what can I do to stimulate my brain in the evenings besides just watching TV and scrolling on TikTok? Because I feel like for the last couple of weeks, I'd be finished work, I'd do my walk, I'd shower, I'd cook, whatever. I'd sit down. It's 8:00. Like it's still a little too early for me to go to bed. And I would just get into the deep vortex of TikTok. And all of a sudden it's 10:00. My eyes hurt, but I just couldn't get out of it. And I just don't think that that's a productive way for me to use my life, really. And so I decided to start crocheting, which I'm going to pause and just say, if you're like, that's so weird, it's actually a really interesting and satisfying little hobby to have. And first and foremost, the reason why I did this, like I said, is because I was sitting on my couch, just like scrolling on TikTok, and I wanted to find a hobby that would help me keep my hands busy so that I couldn't grab my phone the second that I felt bored, which is what I have been doing. Second, I felt like crocheting would help me train my brain to get into more of a flow state of deep work, because in order to crochet, you really need to be focused on the stitch, because it's like very, you're looking at it, you have to be concentrated, and you have to count the stitches. I'm actually in the process of making a bucket hat, and so you do really need to be counting the stitches to make sure it looks correct. And I really am enjoying this like little crocheting journey. One, because it's very inexpensive. I think it cost me like $20 to get some yarn and the crocheting needles. But two, it's doing two things for me. It's stimulating my brain because I have to count, I have to focus on it, and I can put the TV on in the background. But two, it's helping me train myself with deep work. So deep work, and this is something he talks about, is a skill. And it is a skill that you can learn. It's a skill that you can continue to get better at, but you actually have to put yourself in the position to really focus. So by doing a hobby where my hands are busy, I can't reach for my phone because then I'll mess it up, and where I have to count the stitches and I have to be fully focused on it, is helping me get into that state of flow. Maybe not from a work perspective, but it's training my brain to do that, which I think was really the whole point here. So I'm about 3 weeks into doing this, and I'm finding that not only do I enjoy my downtime a lot more, and like I'm looking forward to the end of the workday so that I can go and work on my little projects, but I'm getting a lot better at uninterrupted concentration, and I'm finding that I'm reaching for my phone less at night, and also during the day, it's becoming a little bit easier for me to concentrate. So I think that this is going to be an ongoing journey, and I will keep you updated on how it goes. But if you are in the market for a hobby, or you want to keep your hands busy or do something, I would recommend exploring crocheting, because you can crochet like bucket hats and stuff, which are trendy and cool. It's very inexpensive, and it's really not that hard to learn. Okay, moving into lesson 2. Ritualize your working routines. The ability to enter a state of deep work requires you to ritualize different elements of your day. This includes both how you enter your workday and exit your workday. To enter a state of deep work, you need to define the parameters around where you'll work and for how long, and then how you will work once you start. For example, setting measurable benchmarks. And then how you will support your work, which is related to your environment and what you do before. So let me summarize that. To get into a mindset of being able to do deep work, you need to define the parameters around how long you work and and where. So I will sit at my desk and I will work for 3 hours. Okay, that would be an example. Then once you start, you define your parameters for success. So I'll use my writing, for example. So if I'm going to sit down at my desk for 3 hours and the goal is to enter a state of deep work, how will I measure the success of that work? Well, the ultimate goal of sitting down would be to write one chapter of my book. The measurable parameters would be every 30 minutes did I write 2 pages, because that's pretty reasonable. And if I am on track, like that would be the goal, right? And then how you will support your work, which is related to your environment. So your environment has such an impact on how you exist, perform, and feel. And if you don't like the area that you're working in, if you feel like it's either really dark or really cluttered, or you don't like your desk, or you're uncomfortable in your chair or whatever, you need to change that, because that's distracting and that will like take you out of the mental state of deep work. In my own life, I have focused on ritualizing my mornings and creating a morning routine that helps me clear out my brain and enter the day focused. I talk about this a lot on like my day in the life vlogs. And if you watch my YouTube vlogs, I talk about my morning routine all the time. It's definitely not perfect. And even thinking about this lesson now after reading this book and this section of the book, I can already identify like some bottlenecks that I would want to change in my morning routine. But essentially what I do is I wake up around the same time every day, usually sometime between 7 and 7:30. And I go on my walk. It could be 2 miles, it could be 3 miles, it could be 4 miles. 4 miles is usually the max in the morning. And then I come back to my apartment, I pick up, I make sure that all of the like recycling and trash is all put away. Like if I was drinking a seltzer or something the night before and I didn't put the can away, whatever. I just pick things up, clean my room, make my bed, all that kind of stuff. I do my skincare routine, which I have been on top of. I use Paula's Choice. I talk about that in one of my recent vlogs. I make my coffee and then I sit down and I plan out my day. From there, I know that sounds like a lot of steps, but it's usually like an hour or so. I remove the distractions around me. So I've been putting my phones, I have 2 phones. I have my personal phone and then I have like my work phone, which doesn't have service. It's really just for Wi-Fi, working, social media, pictures, videos, all that kind of stuff. I put both of those phones in my room and I close the door. And then planning out my day along with removing the distractions helps me not only define my parameters around work, but make it easier for me to get in the headspace of concentration. Putting my phones out of sight, out of mind has made honestly the biggest difference for me, not only in terms of concentration, but like anxiety and hyper focusing on things that are outside of my control. So I definitely recommend doing that, because I am the kind of person who will like constantly check Instagram or TikTok or something just to see. And like, I'm not missing anything. I don't need to be checking that. So I think it's really important to put your phones out of the way, or just phone if you are a normal person. The key takeaway here that I hadn't been doing before I began reading this book is a shutdown routine. So he talks about ritualizing how you enter the workday, but he also talks about ritualizing how you exit the workday. A shutdown routine involves going through a series of steps that essentially turns your brain off and allows you to enter the evening time ready to rest. He notes that going into the evening without turning work off can erode your downtime, and your downtime is really important for resting, rejuvenating, and being able to get back into a state of deep work. Usually the work that we're doing at night is not important. So think about checking email or working on like shallow tasks just to catch up or get ahead. If you are guilty of this, you probably know. I always tell myself like, oh, I'll sit on the couch and I'll make my graphics for my Instagram, or I'll answer emails and stuff, or I'll plan out my content. Not only do I never really do that when I sit on the couch, but all that's doing is not allowing my brain to actually rest. Where if I just didn't do that, and I shut down my work and I allowed myself to rest, I could actually get that work done the next day in half the time, because I'm able to focus. By allowing ourselves to work like this, we're eroding the downtime, and that's what ultimately leads to burnout. So I've mentioned I've been struggling a lot with burnout. Part of this book and the lessons from this book are to help me not feel burnt out by really creating that hard divide between work and life that I think a lot of people have struggled with defining ever since we've started working from home a lot more. So in order to maximize my downtime, I've started implementing a shutdown routine where I go through a final email check and I answer any emails that are urgent. I review my daily to-do list. So I make my to-do list every day using the Ultimate Digital Planner. That is the planner that I sell on my page. You can get a digital version or you can print it out, and that is always linked in the show notes. So I review my daily to-do list and I cross off all the things I got done. And then I create a loose plan for the next day where I carry over the tasks that I didn't finish into the next day. And that is how you can avoid forgetting to do things or just not getting everything done. You can just carry it into the next day. And I have found that taking literally the 10 minutes to just do this, not only does it make me feel more in control of my time, but once I finish working, like I'm done. And I don't have that lingering anxiety that's like, I could have done more. I didn't get done what I needed to get done today. Like I've actually just shut it down. I've made my plan for the next day. And then when I wake up the next day, I'm like, okay, I know what needs to get done today. And I feel like I have control over my life. And that is one of the biggest mental shifts that has made it a lot easier for me to be and feel more productive. And if you feel productive, if you feel like you can focus and concentrate, it actually makes a difference in how you show up at work. So those were the first two lessons. And now we'll get into lesson number 3, which is learning how to be bored. One of the main reasons why we are all so addicted to our phones is because we haven't learned how to embrace boredom and be okay with a lack of stimulation. And if you really think about it, most of us will immediately check our phones the moment that we become uncomfortable, whether you're working, studying, or just standing in line somewhere. Using myself as an example, I went to the doctor's office this morning. I filled out my paperwork. I sat down for 1 second, and instead of just sitting there for a minute until my name was called, I immediately am like on my phone looking at Instagram and stuff. Why? I don't need to be on my phone at 8 o'clock in the morning. Like there's nobody who needs me currently. And the only way to overcome this desire, it's literally an addiction and a desire for distraction, is to learn how to concentrate and train your brain to not want or desire that distraction. You can train your brain out of this, but it requires a degree of willpower. To do this, Newport suggests scheduling times when you'll use your phone or the internet, and then scheduling times where you will avoid it altogether. This is like a really key lesson that I honestly think this is one of the biggest and best takeaways from this whole book. By doing this, you are forcing yourself to fill the scheduled time of avoidance with other things, even when you want to use your phone. The key is that even in times where you want to check your phone or use the internet, you are actively making the decision not to and find something else to focus your attention on. The addiction can be broken when you actively choose to concentrate on other things for that defined period of time, and you train your brain that it doesn't need the distraction. The goal of this isn't even to spend less time on your phone or less time using the internet. It's to give yourself the opportunity to resist the distraction at the slightest hint of boredom. To simply wait and be bored is how you rewire your brain. So what he's saying here is you don't need to spend less time. You just need to control the times that you're doing it. So maybe that means for a 2-hour block in the morning, you're working. And then for an hour block, you can have access to your phone and the internet. But during that 2-hour time, even if you're bored, even if you need to use the internet, even if you really, really, really want to check your phone, instead of doing those things, you are choosing something else to do. And what that's doing is it's breaking the desire. It's breaking that connection or that synapse in your brain that's like, I'm bored, gotta check my phone. It's like, no, I'm bored. I need to stimulate my brain doing something else besides grabbing my phone. It's a really interesting perspective and thought. This is something that I've been practicing intentionally, and it's why I started crocheting. Because for me, it's just keeping my hands busy. Because half the time I'm on the phone, I'm not even paying attention to what I'm looking at. I'm just like, I've trained myself to be like, okay, I need to grab my phone. I need to be doing something with my hands. So now I'm actively making the decision to be bored and to focus my attention on something else that will keep my hands busy and almost fill that void, and finding that stimulation in non-connected activities. Because when you really think about it, like, we don't need to be connected as much as we are. And I think a lot of the reasons why I've felt so just like glum and depressed and like I don't want to say not satisfied, but just like I don't know, not super happy is because I'm on social media and I'm comparing my life to other people's. And that's just, we all know that's just not the right thing to be doing. So now we'll move into lesson number 4, which is using social media as a tool, not as a distraction. Kind of segueing off of that last point. I think at this point, we all know that social media has a detrimental impact on our health and happiness. And this is a studied and researched fact at this point. Like, I don't really think it's a disputable thing. That being said, in a perfect world, we'd all get off social media and enjoy our lives. But in the world that we currently live in, this isn't really possible. And even for me specifically, social media is my livelihood. And I would be amiss to get on here and bite the hand that feeds me. Like, I love social media. I don't think social media is evil. And I think when used correctly, social media can truly enhance and change your life. You just have to be open to it and learn how to use it, which I feel like is an ongoing process. I think that social media is amazing, and it's unlocked so much opportunity for so many people, myself included, and made it so much easier to connect. Not even when you think about like the traditional apps, but think about like dating apps and networking apps and stuff. Like, you have access to so many people and so many opportunities and so many different experiences that you would have never had access to without the existence of social media. And we can't say that that's a bad thing. It's honestly a really amazing, cool thing when you look at it from just a different perspective. But with anything, there's always an underbelly, and with overuse, it can become a real time suck, which is also something we all know. He introduces the idea of an internet sabbatical, which is essentially quitting social media for a defined period of time to detox. But this isn't the only alternative to adjusting your social media behavior, and it actually may not be as effective long term as we think. Like, if you go and take a 1 week long social media detox, sure, in that period of time, you might feel better. But once you bring social media back into your life, those old habits tend to creep back in. Maybe the longer you go off social media, the slower they come back, but ultimately they will come back because you didn't make any actual effort to change your day-to-day habits in a realistic and sustainable way. You just cut it out and brought it back in. It's almost like the binging and starving dynamic when you think about diet or eating disorders and stuff. It's like, if you go really long with restricting yourself, you are way more likely to overdo it when you have access to it later. So first, what he does is suggest choosing your social media tools that add value to your life and then eliminating the rest. So rather than spreading your distraction time, so your social media time, across multiple different apps, so think Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Lemonade now, like all these different apps, choose one or two that you get the most out of, whether that be learning the most, entertained the most, laughed the most, whatever you're using social media for, and delete the rest. And then ensure the tools that you are using are offering enough benefits to offset the time and attention you're giving them. And by benefits, it doesn't need to be like, your time is being used to learn so much in your free time. Like, if unwinding at night is spending half an hour or an hour on TikTok just to like entertain yourself, that's completely fine. That's value. But it's if you're spending that time switching between Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and like you're just spending all this time on social media, pick one. You don't need to be distracted across multiple different places. Like, the odds are one of those apps isn't really giving you as much as you think it is. Then what he recommends is putting more time and thought into your leisure time. We tend to use our free time as time to scroll. I do this. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you do that too. So rather than eliminating social media altogether and then being like confronted with all this additional time and having to do so many different new things all at once, which we all know is not the path to build sustainable new habits and practices in your life, you can add other activities into your free time slowly instead. And what that's going to do is it's going to fill that time that you would usually use to scroll with something else. So for me, I'm doing that by crocheting. I've been cooking more. I recently got a Dutch oven. I'm going to start making bread and learning how to make sourdough. Like, I'm picking up smaller, easy to manage hobbies that I can use to fill up the time that I would normally be scrolling. So then there's just less time to do that. And I'm finding more stimulation and more enrichment in the free time that I do have. So figure out what you want to do with your evenings and weekends, and try to do this in advance if you're able to, so that you can provide structure, but also add in time for your hobbies. And I don't think that you need to do this like super in advance. Like, you don't need to schedule out every hour or every couple of hours of your weekend, but create plans during your weekend, whether they're with other people or not. So like maybe on Friday evening, when you're done with work, you could go on a long walk or something. Or on Saturdays, you can go on a hike, or you can go take yourself to run errands. Like, schedule that time and think about what you're using your free time for, so that you don't wake up on a Saturday or a Sunday and be like, I have nothing to do today. And then you just get on your phone in bed and all of a sudden it's noon. So I think that is also a really good insight that he had, which is just being more intentional and really thinking about how you're using the time that you're not working so you can get the most out of it. Moving into the last lesson, lesson number 5, is to regularly audit your time. We spend the majority of our time on autopilot, especially when we're working, because you probably have regular, cyclical, daily, and administrative tasks that you've got to get done. And we're not paying attention to how much time we're using on low impact work and activities. So this would be shallow work. By auditing your time, you can start to draw attention to what you are using your time on and if those activities are actively helping you reach your goals or not. This really got me thinking about my own time and how much of my time I'm using just staying busy because it gives me comfort versus how much of my time is actually moving the needle forward in my business, whether that be generating revenue, nurturing my audience, or creating content that could reach new people or help new people, bring them into the Break Your Budget world, and then hopefully purchase my products, engage with my sponsored posts, and help me continue to generate revenue for my business or buy my book, which is a reminder you should do. And this doesn't just apply to self-employed people, this concept of regularly auditing your time. If you think you can also think critically about how you use your day if you work a 9 to 5, both at work but also outside of work as well. So what he suggests doing is time blocking, which isn't a new concept. It's something that I've been trying to do and failing to do more recently. And to me, this was a good reminder that time blocking can actually really help you effectively plan your day when done correctly. I always struggle with this because I feel like I set out, and he talks about this, but in the morning I'll time block my day and I'll set out what's my ideal day. And then that's never really how it works. We're not realistic when we time block. But he had a tactic for combating this, since it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. Obviously, time blocking is a challenging thing to really nail down. What he suggests is that you block out your day, and then for the tasks that could go longer or the projects that could go longer, what you can do is add a 30 or 60 minute time block at the end of that can have one of two different purposes. So if you're working on your project and you're not finished with it by the end of the originally scheduled time block, you have an additional block at the end of that you can use to continue working. Or if you did finish, then that time block can be used for other smaller tasks before you move on to your next larger time block. I thought that this was a really interesting strategy just because it sounds so obvious, but it's not something that I've ever done. Like, I really do think that changing the way that I time block to be more loose but still structured is key. And his whole point isn't to create like a super rigid schedule. It's just to be more intentional with your time and become more mindful of what you're doing all day. And after reading that, it also got me thinking about budgeting, because I think that the general concept when you think about time blocking is like, well, I don't want to have a super rigid day because it's never going to go to plan. And that's what people think about budgeting is, I don't want to create a super rigid budget because I don't want to feel constrained and I never really stick to it anyways. But really the goal of budgeting is never to create a super rigid plan, because A, that's not realistic, and B, it's never going to work. The goal with building a budget is to just become more intentional with your money and become more intentional with how you are using your money to see if it's adding value to your life. And I thought that was a really interesting parallel between time blocking and managing and controlling your time versus budgeting and managing and controlling your money. So I don't know, lots of really interesting and great lessons in this book. To summarize, the 5 major takeaways from this book, Deep Work is valuable, rare, and meaningful. Ritualize your working routines, both in the morning and in the evening. Learn how to be bored. Use social media as a tool, not as a distraction, and then regularly audit your time. I'm going to wrap up this episode. If you enjoyed it, as always, please go leave me a review. Here is your reminder to go pre-order Own Your Money if you haven't already. And if you've made it this far, you can get $10 off the Personal Finance Dashboard using the code podcast1. And if you'd like to join the book club and get the regular weekly in-depth updates, make sure you join the Facebook group. It will be linked in the show notes. And with that, I will catch you next week in the next episode.